Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to Conversations on Retail. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. It is a beautiful day in Bentonville, Arkansas. We are so excited to have Jorge Risquez, the co-founder and CEO of BOPS, back to continue his series focused on CPFR 2.0 and the technologies that are bringing us closer to consumers. Jorge's guest today is Zach Reuvers, the Vice President of Sales for Sambazon. Just a couple of housekeeping issues as we get started. First of all, thank you so much to Jorge and his team at BOPS for not only sponsoring this series, but creating this series. We're super excited about the group that is growing and the momentum around this conversation. So thank you so much to them for making all this possible. Secondly, we want to make sure everyone understands that this is intended to be a conversation and not a presentation. And so we hope that you will actively participate by asking questions, offering insight. And you can do that at any point during this conversation between Jorge and Zach, simply by clicking on the Q&A button in Zoom and submitting your questions or comments in writing. Last thing, just a reminder that the opinions and recommendations that are expressed by our hosts and guests are those of their own and not necessarily of Conversations on Retail. So make sure you sort of weigh all of that against the suitability of your own circumstances as you hear it. So again, thank you so much. We're glad you're here. Jorge, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Much appreciated, Matt. Thank you very much. Well, Zach, welcome to CPFR 2.0. I'm actually thrilled to be talking to you again. Today, the main kind of focus of the conversation is going to be about growing your sales team within CPG companies. And you have a tremendous trajectory around doing that, especially at Sambazon. But you also have a tremendous CPG trajectory with General Mills, Nature Way. So without further ado, why don't you give us a quick intro of yourself and how do you got engaged with CPGs and then sales teams within CPGs?
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me. Really excited to be here and for the conversation. So first and foremost, thanks, but excited to have this conversation. But yeah, just a little bit about my background, some of my career, and really the way I got started within CPG. I think one of the things that stands out for me always with sales is we always call it the S word, right? Because you start saying sales, people get scared back of, am I cold calling somebody on the phone? What exactly is this? And even throughout the last decade plus of working within the industry and talking to my family about it, I think the best way I usually can sum it up is really grocery store consulting. I think that's the way it's really fun for me in terms of, hey, you're coming and looking at solutions across the board. It's the sales aspect of communication, having that face-to-face interaction and building those relationships, but also making sure, how do we come to a solution around whether it's center store grocery, perimeter. And I think that's the exciting piece for me and been one of the big reasons why I've been excited to be in this industry for the past decade plus. But I started my career with General Mills, so I was able to get a really good CPG toolboxes, I'd call it, around account management, planning, category management. Had the opportunity to work with customers like Target. I was a category captain for a while. So yes, I was in there building pogs at Target headquarters in Minneapolis for a while. And also had the opportunity to be in the field too. Lived in Philadelphia for several years, working on the Albertsons Safeway team on there for Acme and Shaw's. And really that was my first entrance into the natural organic space as well. That's when General Mills acquired Annie's. So I was part of that integration, specifically for Albertsons Safeway. And really that started turning me on to what else is there for a company beyond moving this case of Cheerios, which, hey, Cheerios are great. Don't get me wrong on that. But what are some ways that the product is impacting the lives of consumers, the wider community and stakeholders? And that really led me to work with Nature's Way, my first time working in the HBC space with leader of herbs, probiotics, multivitamins, a unique small private company, and had the opportunity to lead trade marketing there, focusing on corporate strategy. I remember one time sitting with our director of sales in there, figuring out how can we make this larger bottle of products appeal to customers like Target, Kroger, Publix, when you don't want to have a $50 ring on shelf. And we started playing with different box sizes to come up with smaller branded products. But really great experience there. And that really brings me to the company where I am today, heading along that natural organic path of what is the company's purpose? What is the mission? What do you think about when you have that? For me today, it's that Sambazon logo on my shirt. And as the leader in acai across different categories, it really has been the best experience of my career currently. I was part of our natural and conventional teams integration, and today lead the sales team for the Western US and Canada, as well as leading Whole Foods, Target, and Albertsons Safeway for Sambazon. And I should point out is I did have about a 1.5-year stint, actually, after 2.5 years at Sambazon of working with a small private equity group. A lot of great learnings, but have been back at Sambazon since the start of this year, and really returned because believe in the people, our leadership, and the mission being inherent and not something that's forced that I think we see a lot today, unfortunately.
I'll spot on, Zach. Well, I greatly appreciate kind of you sharing your experience. I think when we chatted earlier, something that stood out to me, and I know it's cliche, it's people. Why people and people management, it's so key, not only for you and your sales role at Sambazon, but obviously in your experience as well. Why is so important people, especially in the growth of a CPG within a sales team? Tell me a little bit about share any stories about why people has been one of the key growth aspects that kind of catalyze sales for CPG companies.
Yeah, I think it really starts and ends with people at the end of the day. I think you can have the best brand, the best product, but if you don't have the right people in the right spots, it's not going to be successful at the end of the day. And I've seen that, whether it's at big companies like General Mills, where I started, all the way down to much smaller ones that I've had the opportunity to work with as well. And really that's what it is for me and for me too, when I look at the teams that I've had the opportunity to lead and be a part of, for me, it starts with, we want to have a fast pace. We want to be accountable. We want to have success, but it's putting that into the wider picture, right? And for me, that's one of the things that, with people, it's making sure that the right people with the right talents are in the right positions. I think, again, that's how you're successful at the end of the day with a team, but it's also making sure that those people are treated right. And I think that comes down to the pieces of ensuring that at the end of the day, you're not burning out. You can have the highest performers with a team, but if you're burning them out, you're still not going to get those great results. And I think that can be a tough thing too, especially with a smaller brand. Even at a larger CPG company, right? The work never stops. There's always things that you can be doing, but ensuring that you're working with the right people and prioritizing at the end of the day, whether it's an account, product, subcategory of, if we've got this much time, where are we going to focus on? So at the end of the day, we can also have, I always remember hearing this at General Mills of the work-life balance, right? And that's one of the things I've been really proud to work for Sambazon on is, hey, we've got high goals, high-performing folks that I work with and work for, but we've really found a way to put first and foremost of being a mission-based company, but also how do we treat our people? And it's been one of the places I've never seen people treated better.
No, spot on, Zach. And I do want to piggyback on, and I greatly appreciate you sharing that, but so let's just say it's Amazon, right? You're selling, I've seen a lot of your products through Whole Foods, Costco, Publix, Kroger. Usually a sales team, if we start to go more deep into your role, right, within kind of the different accounts, if we just add it within the retail context, people are working with other people. So let me just put it this way. Your sales, you're working with the buyer of Costco. You're working with your internal supply chain teams. You're working with your internal, some call them the CPFR teams. You're working with. Can you share a little bit about that dynamics of, again, either within a retailer context, how do the people management relationships and dynamics, especially within your role of sales, what is your role? What's the day-to-day? How do you really kind of navigate some of the meetings with your buyers, sometimes with your internal teams to ensure that you get to kind of a common goal and collaboration? Can you share more on that respect?
Yeah, I think it really all starts with honestly communication, and that's really been the key piece. And whether it's whatever company, whatever role, I think that's the biggest thing. And I think sometimes it comes across as, well, that's simple, right? We're always communicating, but I think it's surprising though, even in a post COVID world we live today, where supply chains have gotten better from where they were several years ago, that even talking with some of the great retailer partnerships that we have, over how they don't see communication from a lot of brands. And so that's one of the things that, first and foremost, whether it's internal, especially external, is that we're communicating if there's a situation, even if there's not a situation. Over communication can be something that ensures, I think, that shows that we're on top of the business. We know what's going on in a day-to-day aspect. And honestly, the only thing I think is worse than a late follow-up is not having a follow-up. And we see that a lot, I feel like, and that's one of the things that we hear from our retailer partners. And that really helps us build that relationship, because at the end of the day, for us, it's, yes, we want to, again, big CPG, small CPG, want to have a successful product on shelf, but being able to build that relationship, having that communication aspect, I think that's what's going to separate you from, the 20 other Zachs that are knocking on whatever that retailer's door and trying to get in. And that's how, one of the ways that I think that our team has been able to say, how are we a little bit different, right? At the end of the day, of, hey, we're going to make sure that you're the first to know, not the last to know. We're consistently not only over communicating, but then building that better relationship too of trust. And at the end of the day, I think that's made us successful, if that makes sense.
Oh, makes a lot of sense. When you're dealing with challenges, and I'm going to give you an example, let's just say one of your major key accounts, retailers, a buyer changes, right? Which happens sometimes often, sometimes not that often. What is the move that you as a sales lead need to go do? What would a Zach do and manage this type of situations effectively?
Yeah, and I think that's something that happens every day. We just had that happen with one of our large retailers that we partner with. But for me, it's, I think this goes back to kind of anything, right? Especially when you're coming in for the first time to maybe, whether it may be a retailer relationship like a buyer, like you referenced, or anybody else that you're coming into contact with for the first time with that business relationship. I think it starts with putting together like data and a story, if that makes sense, because everyone's driven by data now, right? Today, it's you see it, even buyers or others that didn't look at things like Nielsen and spins. It's very top of mind. Where's performance at? And that really drives a lot of the conversation. And so I think that needs to be always part of it, right? Is what is the data saying, and what is that telling us about the current state of things, right? And knowing how to use data. So I think it's not only about talking about syndicated data sources like a Nielsen or spins, but how can you be creative if you don't have those, if you're at a smaller company too, and putting those to work for you. But the piece that I think is missing a lot too is it's combining that data aspect with the story. And at Sambazon, we have a great story of being mission-based, people, planet, prosperity. Same thing with the General Mills, Nature's Way of the world. Everybody has a story. And I feel like a lot of the times we're not getting those two things put together, or you see the story is overemphasized or the data is overemphasized. And for me, it's really, whether it's the first time we're meeting or starting a relationship, or it's one that we've had for several years, it's coming in with the data, but making sure that that story is a way that differentiates us from our other competitors and others out there in the market today.
No, that's spot on. And if I could tie some points that you're bringing, so you're mentioning kind of the data, you need to kind of tie back your data with the story of the brand that you're going to be communicating to some of your key retailers. But I also want to tie it back with your previous comment about relationship. If through that dynamics with, again, either a buyer, we're going to talk about other internal relationships in a bit, but if you could tie back data, story, relationships to kind of tie back your objectives and goals, right? There's a new buyer that comes in. Well, this is data, this is a story, but what is really kind of going to be your goals, buyer? My goals are going to be X, Y, or Z. These are the categories that I'm seeing. This is where we play. And then eventually that could help you kind of start with a good foot to kind of move forward and continue to kind of grow whatever strategy means in each kind of brand. But I think it's something that we have seen worked a ton. Did you found yourself, Zach, given Sambazon, you're selling through multiple retailers? Have you ever encountered where you're working with retailers? I'm assuming directly with the buyer, yes. But have you ever worked with buyers with brand brokers, and how are those dynamics different when you're having buyers that Zach is going directly, you build a relationship, or if you actually go through brand brokers, right, for a particular account? Have you encountered that in your career?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'd say outside of General Mills, have really relied on broker partnerships and relationships to be successful at a number of different companies, including where I'm at today with Sambazon. I think the most important thing, and I see this a lot with other companies and other folks I work with, even within some of the internal organizations I've been, is relying too much on that broker. There's a lot brokers can do, and for us, we need them today. We're a small team that covers the entire country in some respects, and large retailers. So using those partnerships effectively is key to being able to get the day-to-day done and staying on top of things. Where I think I see some things fall off a lot, though, is using that broker to handle the key relationship, right? It should be an add-on, it should be an enhancement to your suite of tools, for lack of a better word, but it shouldn't take the place of it in a lot of respects. And I think that's where I've seen it go wrong. Is we still want to be the face, whether we're talking to the biggest retailer or even the smallest retailer. At the end of the day, is that the teams that I've worked with have always said, hey, we still want to be the face of the company when we're going to the customer. That broker should be a supplement to help make sure you're not missing things, we're getting things in on time. It really should be an add-on versus, hey, they're taking care of it, if that makes sense. At least that's how I viewed it.
I greatly appreciate you sharing that. So for a lot of kind of the fast growth brands like Sambazon, right, that are out there working with brokers, I think, Zach, one of the messages that you're giving here is you still need the brand, you still need to be the face, you still need to put the effort to travel to whatever kind of the key retailer is, Minneapolis, Bentonville, and a few others, to have established that good relationship. Don't just rely on the broker. The broker is always going to be complementary. And again, it's definitely a dynamics in terms of going back to relationship, right? You need to make sure that you manage the dynamics between the buyer, the brand broker, and now Zach. But now, Zach, I do want to take that relationship to how do you work backwards internally, right? So let's just say you and your brand broker are able to figure out, wow, we got into this key account. This is going to guarantee me a specific amount of demand. Now I need to go supply it. Who do Zach works with? How does Zach build a team? Do you create a centralized team to support Costco, Whole Foods, Publix, or do you have a specific account teams to kind of supply pretty much the demand that you have generated once you are kind of creating an effective sales team? Tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's something extremely important. Once you create the demand, how do you supply it and how do you maintain it?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question, because I think that's where things get lost a little bit. It's great that we've made the sale, we've got the store count, we got into whatever retailer it is, right? And there's nothing quite like that excitement. It's a big piece of why I love what I do day in, day out. But then there comes the second piece, to your point, of how do we supply that demand? And that's one of the things I've been really grateful for, is just the talented operations folks that I've worked with at Sambazon. But I've seen that get missed in even big organizations, smaller ones, maybe more so, where you don't have some of the processes built in place. Really, that's one of the things too that, over the last 5 or so years, Sambazon, and we did a really good job from sales, partnering with our operations side to say, okay, how can we cross these silos a little bit? How can we work together to figure out our products coming out of Brazil currently, but when I was working at General Mills or Nature's Way, you're sourcing herbs from all over the world. And if there's an issue on supply, how can sales and operations work together to say, like, can we cut that lead time down? Are there ways that we could work together, from taking the product in port to maybe giving it directly to a distributor versus going through our internal warehouses, cutting off a week or two of time? And I feel like that was a lot of my life, and probably a lot of other people's lives during COVID with supply chain. But it's not just COVID, right? That happens every day on aspect of how do we work through supply. And I think it starts with making sure that you have some of the processes and you're tapped in to those operations folks within your internal organization to make sure that things aren't being forgotten. And it's not just things being forgotten, it's helping getting people together and thinking about, have we thought about this or have we thought about that? I think that's one of the things too that seemed to work really, really well for us in the last several years, is having more of those cross-functional conversations and really working together to say, here's the problem, let's think of some creative ways to solve it, versus, hey, that's not my problem, I don't ship the product, I just sell it. When in reality, it's no, everyone's responsible as a stakeholder, from when we sell that product in, even if they're not in sales, right? Marketing, operations, finance, they all have a hand in it. I think that's the big piece, is making sure that folks understand that. And that's one of the things that our teams at Sambazon do understand, which is really great. But I've seen that not work in that aspect at other places, where it's really about crossing those silos and bringing people together, which I think might sound simple, but seen a lot of problems get solved pretty quickly when you're just having conversations.
No, spot on. No, like that makes a lot of sense. As you're scaling, and obviously depends brand by brand, but do you think a centralized strategy where you have, again, one big sales team that owns multiple sales teams, by retailer accounts, and obviously you could have food service as well. Or do you think a decentralized type of, wow, I work directly with Costco, I work directly with Walmart, I work directly with Publix, and I have small teams where I have my sales team, if I have a brand broker, my brand broker, and in some cases, right, a lot of companies start to build their CPFR or replenishment arm, which kind of support that operations arm that you're mentioning. So at what point, how do you design this strategy? Because as you're building your sales teams, obviously your supply teams are going to grow. So do you believe in centralized matter, or do you believe in a decentralized teams sufficing each retailer account? What's your take on that? It really depends.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and this might sound like a little bit of a cop out, but I don't think it is, because it's true, and I think you need to have a little bit of both, honestly, at the end of the day. My team structure currently, looking at it, is you have someone that's responsible for each and every account, whether that's a small account, a region, and so you have that leading up into a centralized structure there, and there might be brokers that are also helping support that. But at the end of the day, it's, there's an accountable person within our structure for each and every account. And then they're working cross-functionally, whether that's with marketing, sales, or finance, to ensure that things are successful. And I think that's been the way that I've seen it be successful, because if you have a problem with account A, it's, exactly the person that you're going to go to, that's the lead on that account. And then that obviously ladders up to whether it's myself or the folks that I would work for in terms of a hierarchy. So in that respect, I think it's centralized, right? Because we're able to look at, my team covers the Western US, for instance, as well as a couple of top national retailers. So whether it's me or someone else on my team, you can always know who is the person that is most into the weeds on this to answer a question. But then they're connected to all the other pieces, whether it's they're connected to the brokers or they're directly connected with our finance, marketing, and operations teams.
Spot on. Zach, before we go out of this topic, how often do you talk with your retailer account buyers? Is it weekly? Is it every 2 days? How often does this happen for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it shouldn't just include, I'd say, if I could tweak it a little bit, I'd say that it shouldn't just be buyers we're talking about, but the retailer in general. And what I mean by that is, for instance, inventory teams, right? Those folks can be just as important, if not more important sometimes, than working with the buyers, of ensuring, hey, we're seeing an issue here in terms of out of stocks. How do we solve that? And it might be an issue with, is there something wrong in the system? Is there something wrong with one of our distributors? Or if we're delivering directly, is there an issue there? I think that's been the piece of making sure that we've built relationships, not just with buyers, but also with their support teams that they're working with, to make sure that the exact people to go to, whether it's marketing, if you're running different promotions, or putting together different support for the brand. But the operation side, I think, is the most important, of saying, hey, we're seeing some high out of stocks right here. We don't have issues on inventory. How can we work together to make sure that we're optimizing our sales and that you're optimizing yours on shelf? And that's been something that we've been really successful on, is making sure that we're directly working with those folks, because they're the ones that are going to be able to pull the lever and make changes at the end of the day. So I think that's the biggest piece that I've seen be successful, is how do you broaden the network at a retailer beyond just the buyer and the other key folks that they're working with on a day in and day out basis.
That's such a good point. So I'm going to pick on the replenishment managers for the retailers, right? Those are the folks looking out of stocks, sometimes excess stocks, for some specific product, shrinkage or waste. Tell me a little bit more about that. Is usually your account manager the person kind of that is building that relationship, or do you bring one of your operations team to help with that relationships of out of stock? And obviously depends on the stage of where you are as a company, the resources you have, but it's interesting you're bringing that. I think this is from an inventory management perspective. I'm also intrigued to hear your story from a marketing perspective as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think this goes back to when you were asking about centralized, decentralized, right? How do you think about that? And I think it always should start, at least in my opinion, with who is that account lead, right? Who is assigned to that account? It should start with them. But we have a really great operations team, a sales strategy team that we work with at Sambazon, for instance, where you'd bring along that individual with to say, hey, they have a little bit more of a background on some of the operations pieces that I or another member of my team may have on a day-to-day basis. but then you're putting together, right, someone with a strategy, operations, specific background, and then you're pairing them up with the sales aspect that knows exactly what's going on at that account. And it really allows you to diagnose and really fix the problem. And what we found too is if you're bringing that together at the beginning versus later, you're going to save yourself a ton of time, right? Versus, okay, it's this issue on inventory, I'm not exactly sure, I'm going to have to go back to them, versus let's start the conversation with that person involved as well, so we can get right to it instead of jumping around and creating a large email or phone chain at the end of the day.
Spot on. I want to mention this to the audience, right? This is to me the birth of the CPFR. That person kind of, it has to have a sales angle, it has to have an inventory management angle, and it also has to have some sort of promotion management angle that supports the account manager to pretty much address out of stocks, address compliance issues sometime when you're not shipping on time, address sometimes excess stock. So I think it's interesting that you're kind of embracing that, because especially a fast-growing brand like yours, it starts to become a necessity or a need to be able to have those type of strategic roles to address those challenges, because it's always going to happen on a trading or a trading relationship management with your customers.
And I think it just builds that relationship. It builds the trust to when you're coming proactively to a buyer saying, not just, hey, we're having out of stocks. What do you think you can do? What do you think we should do? Or can you help us solve this? Versus, hey, we have some out of stocks here. Here's what was driving them. We worked with your inventory team, our operations team to take care of it. We want to make you aware. I think that goes a long way of A, it gets the problem solved, but then B, just shows from a relationship and trust standpoint of we're all in this together, right? It's not just I'm just making this your problem at the end of the day. It's we're working to solve
Exactly.
it.
I would like to tie it back to kind of, I really love the way you put it before, but I would like to tie it back to, this is the data is the out of stock, right? A root cause comes back to the story. Well, maybe there's a lot of percentages of phantom inventory happening at all these stores. It could also be, again, an order fill rate problem. And this is how, this is the data, this is a story, this is the root cause of how we're going to solve that problem. And then the relationship to, hey, let's partner, let's collaborate together, either buyer or replenishment manager within the retailer, so that you could solve that problem and continuously maintain and build that relationship with your retailer and be a top performer brand. So I wanted to tie it back to how you started. I know we got 3 more minutes. Is there anything else, Zach, that you want to kind of communicate out on building effective sales teams within CPG brands? Anything else that you want to add before we ask questions?
Yeah, I think just a couple of quick things I would just point on is, we talked about it earlier, but people really continue to be the biggest asset. And if you don't have the right people there, I really think you're not going to be successful at the end of the day. So that's one of the things that I love working with the team that I have at Sambazon and the folks that I work for at Sambazon, because we have people that listen, impactfully lead, right people at all levels. I think one of the other things too, when you talk about people, and this is what I talk about with my team too, is that it seems like today, right, we're running, doing a million things at a time, but preparation and practice seem to be really undersold. And one of the big things, this just happened to us in one of the top retailers here in the country, is that what happens when you've got a 30-minute meeting that somehow gets cut down to 15 minutes? Because like you said, everyone's busy right now, and sometimes you're not going to get your full time. So what are those priorities that you're trying to cover? And that, I think that happens a lot more than not. And I've seen, unfortunately, happen at a number of different organizations where people aren't prepared to say, what are we trying to get out of this short amount of time that we have? And that preparation and practice seems sometimes lost or even undervalued in the world today.
Spot on. I greatly appreciate that message. And I think we're going to end up with that message, Zach. Before we finish the session, are there any questions? I do want to open kind of the questions for the audience. I think there's a few. Let me look at them. So Jay, do you do joint business planning with your customers? In this case, is collaborative forecasting, for example. Do you challenge sometimes the forecast, under forecast, over forecast?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The short answer is yes. And really what the things that we've seen really successful with putting a JBP together is making actionable insights or actionable goals of, at the end of the day, inventory can be a big part of that, right? And making sure that things are flowing through smooth operations. But the best and most impactful joint business planning plans or conversations I've seen is when it says, hey, here's where we are today. Our goal is to go, whether you have a sales goal or it's getting that extra item into the set, here's where we want to be. What are the things that we can work together to make this happen? And it's not always going to happen, right? There might be different priorities that a retailer has, but coming out and making sure it's very clear of here's what our priorities are, what are yours, and then what are the things that you need to see from us to be able to get there, has really allowed us to scale and get into most of the top retailers in the country today.
Spot on, Zach. As a follow-up, how do you tie promotions, right? You're always thinking ahead and in promotions, right? I'm assuming promotions come as part of that joint business planning conversations, right? I'm assuming we're going to do a big promotions in this particular category of my products, X, Y, or C. That's why we think maybe our goal will be to get towards this forecast. Is that relevant into some of those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key piece of making it actionable, right? And making sure it's a piece that's not you just want to grow sales or improve inventory. It's saying here's the data, and I think that's where the aspect of data is really important. And then leveraging that data to say, okay, how do we, whether it's growing 5%, 10%, whatever that goal might be, and putting those pieces into place that are tangible and actionable. And I think that's where sometimes some of those things fall apart, which is we want to grow sales, but okay, let's take that back a step. This is how we're going to go to sales, and here's what we're projecting from either an inventory or total sales perspective.
Amazing, amazing. Any other questions? All righty, I think we're right on time. Zach, it's been a pleasure. I think your energy is kind of contagious a lot of us, especially in building sales teams. And I think you really brought different angles of how to build effective sales teams and the dynamics of relationships. How do you use data? How do you combine data within stories? How do you really deal with brand brokers, buyers, internal supply chain teams? How do you give the inventory management angle? I think I appreciate you bringing all of those insights, just 30 minutes. So thank you so much for really spending the time with us. And anything else you want to say before we close?
No, just thank you. It's I'm blessed to be with a great team, great company such as Sambazon. So it's a fun thing every day. It's a fun mission to get behind. And again, it's working with the great people makes the big difference. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. But it's one of the things I'm passionate about, and had a great time discussing today.
Thank you so much, Zach. Well, you have a fantastic day. Thank you, Matt Pfeiffer, as well, and Conversations in Retail.
Take care.